Good evening. Welcome to Native News Online's Crisis in Indian Country, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women live stream. We come to you tonight from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we have people around the country, and we'll introduce them in a minute. But today is the National Awareness Day for the missing and murdered women, and some people have incorporated the word persons, and President Joe Biden made a proclamation this afternoon or today that it was inclusive of persons. So we understand the situation. So but in context of tonight's live stream, you will hear us speaking about the women, and we are pleased that you joined us tonight. We have some panelists that are ready and able to go and talk. And so we also like to thank our sponsors and our gold sponsors, the Coushatta tribe of Louisiana. Another sponsor is the Navajo Nation. And we have a Gathering Thunder Foundation out of Michigan that does a lot of good work on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation that is able to do wonderful work. So we also want to thank Tom Rogers from the Global Indigenous Council that has been helpful in assembling tonight's show. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. And Kyle, can you introduce the guests we have?
Absolutely. So hello everyone, my name's Kyle Edwards. I'm the managing editor of Native News Online. I'm a Anishinaabe. I come from the Lake Manitoba First Nation in Canada, and I am a member of the Ebb and Flow First Nation in Manitoba as well. I guess to start, I will introduce David Sickey, who is the chairman of the Coushatta tribe of Louisiana. And also with us this evening, let me take a look here. We're missing some folks. Sorry, one sec. We have Chairwoman Shelly Fayant of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Shelly Fayant was raised in Arley and graduated from Ronan High School in 1975. She obtained an AA degree in liberal arts from Haskell University in 1978 and later returned to the University of Montana for a degree in business administration in 1989. She is an avid Grizz football fan and a gardener and beater. Her spare time is spent in the mountains with family, including her 4 sons, 7 grandchildren, and 1 great-granddaughter. She's a supporter of the Food Sovereignty Initiative and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous People efforts. Also with us is Patricia R Alexander. Patricia Roberts Alexander is from the Tlingit and Haida tribe of Alaska, Juneau. She is the co-chair of the Tlingit and Haida MMIW Commission 2020. She's the 2021 Citizen of the Year, retired. She's a retired healthcare administrator and has presented congressional testimony on the AK situation. We also have Mary Catherine Nagle. She is from the Cherokee Nation and she is an attorney. Mary Catherine Nagle is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. She is also a partner at Pipe Stem and Nagle Law PC, where she works to protect tribal sovereignty and the inherent right of Indian nations to protect their women and children from domestic violence and sexual assault. From 2015 to 2019, she served as the first executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program. Nagle is an alum of the 2013 Public Theater Emerging Writers Program. Her productions include Mislead, Miranda, I'm reading something strange here. Fairy Tale Traceable, Sovereignty, Mannahatta, Return to Niobrara, and Crossing Minosi. Sorry, I'm pronouncing some words wrong here. And she has received commissions from Arena Stage, the Rose Theater, Portland Center Stage, Denver Center for the Performing Arts, the Yale Repertory Theater, the Roundhouse Theater, and finally the Oregon Shakespeare Theater. I just want to thank everyone here for joining us today, and I am going to turn it back over to my colleague Levi.
Yeah, so the issue of Indigenous women going missing and murdered is not a new phenomenon. I like to, in my writings, basically go back to when Columbus arrived in the hemisphere. Our women have faced some very difficult times ever since, and it's tragic. But today's numbers are that the U.S. Department of Justice, some of the most recent numbers say that Native women are 10 times more, they are more likely to face violence on a national in the murder rate. And then more than 5,000 American women and Alaska Native women have gone missing. And 55% of Native women have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. So those are some tragic numbers. Just yesterday, Native News Online reported that a woman who had gone missing for I think it was 15 years, and you see the headline there. It is being well received, but she was missing for like 15 years, and then so many dimensions of the missing and murdered women issue in the United States are really prevalent in the article. And one was she was misidentified. She was listed as white. When her family tried to discuss the matter with law enforcement, they were met with some resistance, like that really isn't your sister or your mother. And I guess from my perspective, when I read the story, I was really appreciating the persistence of that family of being able to really push the envelope. And the law enforcement actually got to the point where they acknowledged just last week, I think it was on April 27th, that through DNA testing that she was in fact this woman who was missing for all these many years. And so it's a very tragic story. And so tonight's topics will be around that. We want to talk about some of the problems that have existed in Indian country surrounding this issue. Later on, we have a video, special guest for the Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, will be speaking to us. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle, and then we can proceed.
Okay, so I guess our first question, and I will let whoever would like to jump in and answer this one just come in. It's a bit of a broad question, but why do you think missing and murdered Indigenous women is such a huge problem, not just in the United States, but also Canada? And I guess I'll start with David.
I think
Chairman Sicky.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity and this kind invitation, by the way. And on behalf of the Coushatta Tribe of Louisiana, as the tribal chairman, I want to thank everyone for your participation, your interest, and those that are joining us via live stream. So we're very proud of the fact that we are presenting to tonight's program. And when you look at the numbers, in 2016 alone, close to 6,000 Native American women and girls were missing or murdered. And this is in a country where we're supposed to be the most advanced democratic country in the world. And we've made great strides here as a country since the founding of America. And yet it seems that the country's original citizens are at a critical disadvantage. And these numbers are just staggering. And forums such as this give us the opportunity to obviously raise awareness and get the numbers and the true facts out there. And sometimes we have to face facts that are unpleasant or tragic or horrific in order to begin addressing the needs of our country, and specifically for tonight's discussion, address the needs and concerns of Indian country. And I think over time, over the course of this country's history, as we all know, we have lacked the proper support from the federal level. Meaning resources are scarce, much less the priorities are not always aligned with Native American interests. And so tribal governments and tribal nations need funding for law enforcement and tribal court facilities. And in addition to that, we need the law to be robust and exist. And I know that some of my colleagues on tonight's panel can expand on those thoughts. But again, the support, the proper and adequate support, has simply not been there for many decades. And here's an opportunity to look back, reflect, pause, and assess what we actually do need. And thankfully, I want to thank this administration's support and President Biden's leadership on this matter. Here's a historic opportunity to address this very aggressively, while we have an administration that has shown and demonstrated strong support in the past during his career. In addition to that, as you know, the Interior Secretary, Ms. Holland, is a huge advocate for this issue as well. So we have some very aggressive, robust support from the highest levels of the government, and now's the opportunity to take advantage of that and move forward in the most progressive and positive and urgent way possible. So,
Mary, I'll just come over to you. Can you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the systemic, perhaps even historical, reasons for why we see these tragic numbers today when it comes to MMIWG?
Absolutely. And thank you for that question. And it's an honor to be here with you all tonight. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel for this really important conversation. I think, I always like to refer folks to one of my dear colleagues, Sarah Deer, who's a citizen of the Creek Nation and a scholar on these issues, to her book, The Beginning and End of Rape, because I think what she does such an excellent job of in that book is really showing that violence against Native women is not new. It's not an accident. It was a very, very purposeful tactic used by the United States, but all the colonial powers that came before them that also tried to conquer our land. And so it became very early on a tool that outside forces used in an effort to dismantle the sovereignty of our nations. And that was because they realized that women are the foundation of our nations. And if they could wipe out our women, we wouldn't have a nation anymore. And so all you have to do is read Christopher Columbus's journals, where he and his crewmates are bragging about all the Native women they raped and murdered and killed. So unfortunately, history is just sort of a continuation of that narrative, of that reality. I know from our nation's Trail of Tears, there were a lot of soldiers who raped our women on the Trail of Tears. And I think that that's unfortunately a story of survival that a lot of our nations have. And it didn't work. We're still here. But the levels of violence are as well. They have not ended. And I think that there has been an unconscious teaching to non-Native Americans that this is permissible conduct. In fact, it's even been somewhat awarded in the past, right? And so you take that culture, that history, and you couple that with a legal framework where here in the United States, and I really can't speak, for our relatives up in Canada, I'm not as familiar with their situation, but in the United States, the Supreme Court in 1978 eliminated tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians in the decision Oliphant. We know from statistics from the U.S. Department of Justice that although we know Native people commit violent crimes against Native people. That happens. The majority of violent crimes being committed against Native people on tribal lands are being committed by non-Indians. And because of the Supreme Court's decision in Oliphant, our tribal nations simply don't have criminal jurisdiction to prosecute the majority of the violent crimes being committed against our citizens in their own homes. And so if you couple that, you got a culture that has been promoting this sort of violence historically for very specific purposes. And then you've got a legal framework that has stripped tribal nations of their inherent right to address these crimes. You've got a recipe for disaster. And so that's, I think, the very big picture reason why we have so many crimes of violence against our Native women today. And then, of course, on the granular level, every community has a different story of why a local law enforcement or county sheriff is not prosecuting these crimes. And, that's the fight we face today.
Mm-hmm. Chairman Shelly Fayant, I'll turn it over to you. What is your thoughts on why we're going through this epidemic, both in the past and in the present? And if you could talk a little bit about your tribe and how it's dealt with this crisis over the years.
Okay, thank you. So, as everyone has said, it's not an epidemic, it's not a new crisis. It started with the invaders' arrival to Turtle Island, and it's just been more publicized now thanks to the media. That's what's different between then and now. A lot of deaths. I have a close family member, grandmother, whose death was attributed to hypothermia. There's just a lot of systemic institutional racism that all contributes to it, not to mention sex trafficking, and the role that pipelines play into that, drugs, substance abuse. Locally we have drug cartels, so there's a million reasons why. But I think, so what we've been doing at CSKT, we established a MMIP working group back in 2019, and that was a result of one of our own missing youths who is the same age as my oldest granddaughter. She's been missing, it'll be 3 years in June, and I'm close with her grandmother. Our fathers served on tribal council together. My son and her daughter, the same age. We've just kind of our families have been close, throughout the generations. And she went missing. And so our tribe developed by resolution a working group to look at, prevention, education, and awareness, the connection to domestic violence and drug activity, and it's just taken off from there. Currently, the individual I speak of, Jermaine Charlo, we have a $15,000 reward for information leading to the prosecution, but it's been going on 3 years, so it's really heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. And Jermaine Charlo, if I'm not mistaken, was a part of a podcast series that recently came out. Is that correct?
Yes, it's called Stolen, The Search for Jermaine. You can find that on Spotify.
Mm-hmm. And that's by the reporter Connie Walker. Just throw that out there for our listeners. Yep. Levi?
Well, I like the flow of this conversation because you three seem to have a nice in-depth grasp of the situation. I guess I want to know if you think, why is it that it just has become more prevalent or more aware? The awareness has creeped into the media in recent years. And Mary Catherine, maybe you can answer that.
Well, it's a great question because as everyone else has said tonight, this is not a new crisis. And at the same time, too, it seems like a few cases here and there have really hit the media. I think for a lot of families, their cases haven't hit the media. And of course, no one wants to begrudge a family who's lost someone who gets media attention. We want to lift everyone up, but I think it's really hard for the families whose loved one is murdered and they get no media attention, of which there are so many in Indian country right now. But it's true that that more recently we've seen things like the New York Times or the Washington Post or some of these national non-native news networks want to write on the story. And I think that is in part because the data is we're just now collecting the data. I mean, we've always known this in Indian country. And I think that the publication of this data and also, to be fair, I think as many of us know, and as the Urban Indian Health Institute published in their report, especially in urban areas, so many of our Native women, when they are murdered or victims of crime, the local police, the urban police do not mark if a woman's Native. So unfortunately, we're missing a lot of data, but the data we do have is so incredibly alarming. I think now that it's kind of getting out there in that format, the national non-native news media is picking up on the data, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We need attention. We need focus. That national news attention is what got the focus of the Senate to create and pass Savannah's Act. And I think so in some ways that works in our favor, but I think too, we have to be careful because sometimes the risk is that the story becomes the data and not the actual lives that are being lost. And I know for a lot of the victims' families too, that can be really, really hard to personalize the data and remind everyone that every murder is a person and a loss of a loved one.
That's just it. It's these are our stolen sisters, mothers, grandmothers, aunties, cousins, on and on, friends and family, tribal community members. Chairwoman Fayant, talk about what happened with the ABC show this year and how did your tribe deal with it?
So ABC had a series called Big Sky, and it was about missing and murdered women. And it was filmed in Montana, the story was set in Montana, but it was actually filmed in Canada. And we got this just random email saying, we're going to use your tribe as a setting. And they sent a picture of our tribal complex, which I think they got off of our website. And then we said, whoa, no, you're not. There's a process that we have. And the next thing, we got another random request from a really young, I guess, naive Native actress that they hired, who was their liaison. And she had taken a picture of, we have this veterans memorial outside of our tribal complex, and there's shields with all the armed services logos, and they're made to look like shields. And she said, is there some special significance? Because we're modeling our set after this veterans memorial. And we said, whoa, hold the bus. You can't use our identity. It's not for sale. Your executives haven't consulted with us. We have protocols, for film. So NCAI ended up weighing in on this with ABC and, kind of set the record straight. But that was a huge issue for us. And this was the same time that we were going through the development of a tribal community response plan, which is a result of Operation Lady Justice from the previous administration. And so it was a really strange coincidence that, we were focusing a lot of efforts on our tribal community response plan. And then here comes this thing out of left field that was, again, trying to marginalize our identity. So, that happened.
Chairman Sickey, what's your thoughts on why is it the media is just now paying attention to the problem that has existed for, you could argue, centuries?
Well, I think let's give credit to tribal nations and communities and tribal leadership for taking it upon themselves to recognize that there's a need for awareness. So I applaud and commend those tribal nations and tribal leaders, tribal chairmen and tribal councils all across this country that have stepped forward and brought these issues to the forefront. Sometimes it takes an aggressive, robust effort to identify those concerns that we face on a daily basis. And as you know, many tribal nations and communities are located in rural areas. And I think also by deploying modern techniques and tools of communication and exploiting those communication tools is helping here in the age of social media. That has been a huge blessing for our tribe, for example, in helping raise the awareness of MMIW. So tribal nations are doing a more wonderful job of, again, exploiting and utilizing those communication tools. Social media is just a tremendous avenue to take and to take full advantage of. So I think where the media, the traditional media falls short, tribal nations are taking the opportunity to identify areas where they can get information across through channels that were not typical utilized before. So let's give credit to tribal nations that are doing wonderful work around this country on this matter, guys. It's a difficult time for everyone. Again, it's sometimes we have to face it. Sometimes the truth is not pleasant sometimes, and the facts are not pleasant to look at and to read. But let me kind of expand, and Miss Mary Nagle here earlier made a comment, and it reminded me of the fact that here in our state, for example, when we began looking at this issue very closely here in our home state of Louisiana, we found out in our due diligence that the coroner's office and agency level health entities simply didn't have a category for Native Americans. So my fellow panel members here mentioned that the data sets simply don't exist. Here in Louisiana, we're categorized as other, which is, which is hard to believe, but it's a fact. But I'm not here to point fingers, guys, tonight at anyone. I'm here to begin addressing this and do it in the most urgent way possible.
Well, thank you. And I think those are great comments. I know at Native News Online, we really do try to do our best to give good coverage of this. And even with limited resources, we just feel like it needs to be expanded. And we really do hope. And to your point, being mentioned as other, and I allude back to what happened on election night when CNN referred to us, put us in a catch-all category of something else. And so as Native people, we all know that we still have a lot of work to do here in the United States and in Canada. So I'll turn it back to Kyle.
Perfect. Thanks, Levi. Mary, I will come back to you with this question. What are some of the barriers that Indigenous people and the families of victims in particular face when it comes to cases of our missing women? And I guess just from like a legal perspective, you touched a little bit on it earlier. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that the jurisdictional issues are huge and the urban issues are huge, but putting those aside for just a second, when you're on tribal lands or in a border town, really, I think in all those circumstances, if a Native woman or Native person has been murdered, the FBI, the feds, the BIA police, they need to do their job and investigate. And if they're ultimately not the sovereign with full jurisdiction to prosecute, then they can hand it off to the tribe or the state. But they need to be there from day one, actively investigating. And right now, most often they're not. And that has been a huge issue. In some of the cases I've worked on, they've told the families, well, we just don't have jurisdiction. When that's simply not true. For instance, in case Sarah Stopp's Pretty Places case, her body was found a mile off the border of the Crow Reservation. And until you've done an investigation, how can you conclude that she wasn't murdered on the reservation? You just don't know. And yet they never did an investigation. And in fact, the county, since her body was found in the county, was going to do an investigation, but then decided not to because they basically blamed her and said, well, she just died of natural causes. Actually, at first they tried to blame it on, intoxication with alcohol or drugs. But then when the autopsy came back and showed that was certainly not the case, then they had to change their story. And they said, well, she just wandered into, I guess, the yard of a busy suburban neighborhood and lay there for 5 days and died until someone found her body, which is ludicrous. So families are faced with this situation where the feds are completely abdicating their treaty, trust, duty, and responsibility to investigate these crimes. The local law enforcement in the border town or right off the reservation is saying, it's not really a homicide, blaming the victim and not looking into this. And Sarah's case really exemplifies what so many families are facing. I've worked on other cases, some of which I don't have permission to state the name publicly because the family is in fear. The killer still roams free in the community and holds a lot of power in the community. And we're talking a lot of times border towns. And the local sheriff there for the county is friends with the individual who's murdered the Native woman. And so the family fears that if they speak out, they could be yet another victim. And so we're really up against a lot of odds, the families are, in trying to get local county law enforcement to prosecute. If you think about Bighorn County, how many do you have to have? One is too many. They've got like 50. It's insane. And I think what the documentary that came out today called Say Her Name does such a great job of showing is, we have this, the United States has sort of like a fascination with killers who target, let's be honest, young white women. And here we, and kind of gives examples of different serial killers who kind of became famous and the FBI came out to state jurisdictions and investigated these crimes. In Hardin, we've had many more murders, and yet no real involvement from the FBI or the feds. So I think ultimately what it is for families, by and large, our families in Indian country have to do the investigations themselves. The burden is on them to investigate. And that is so incredibly challenging, to have to be collecting the evidence yourself, doing witness interviews, and then begging law enforcement to do an investigation. But that's the position they're in.
And I just want to follow up real quick, just for our listeners, and maybe some of our listeners who may not be Indigenous. And I'm looking at our chat, and there appears to be some of them who are saying that they have not really heard much about the issue. But Mary, could you just touch a little bit on, if there is a murder on a reservation or tribal lands, whose jurisdiction is it to investigate that case?
So if it's on tribal lands, and the Native person, regardless of gender or sexual orientation or any kind of identity, if they're a Native person on tribal lands and they're murdered by a non-Native, because of the Supreme Court's decision in Oliphant, the tribe does not have criminal jurisdiction, and that's a huge crisis. Now, the federal government does, and they really should be investigating and prosecuting these cases, and they most often don't. That's certainly the case with Lindsay Whiteman, who's a Blackfeet citizen who was murdered on her reservation by a non-Indian, and it's another case I've been working on. And the FBI literally didn't talk to the family for 2 years, and on this past February, showed up one day at her brother's place of work and just handed him her clothing and said, "Here's the clothing your sister was wearing the day she died 2 years ago. The case is closed." And that was it. And they didn't actually actually do an investigation. So the feds do have jurisdiction. Now, the state has jurisdiction in a lot of those instances as well, unless the crime is committed by a tribal citizen, in which case only the feds and the tribe have criminal jurisdiction over crimes committed by tribal citizens on tribal lands. It's a separate issue, but that's actually what the governor of Oklahoma is crying about right now, is after McGirt, that they don't have criminal jurisdiction over crimes committed by tribal citizens on tribal lands. But that's neither here nor there for tonight's conversation. But I think the really important point is it can get really confusing. I mean, and you can, law school professors get very confused because I mean, like we all do, and because there's all these different variations. But at the end of the day, the feds have a lot of discretion to investigate and prosecute these crimes on tribal lands. And oftentimes when they're not, and sometimes they'll say it's a lack of jurisdiction, it's really not. It's prosecutorial discretion. They're just choosing not to, and they're choosing to focus more on prosecuting crimes related to like drug crimes or other things that are not murders of Native women and children. So, but at the end of the day, that's sort of as best as I can quickly explain it, the jurisdictional framework.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you mentioning the legal barriers when it comes to law enforcement as well. Someone who's watching in the chat had mentioned the Sovereign Bodies Institute in Northern California, which put out a report last year that detailed many of the challenges for tribal communities in Humboldt County in Northern California, and the concerns they've had with local law enforcement ignoring cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And just to come to Chairman Fayant, Chairman, we've talked a little bit about the crisis more generally in our communities, but when a woman does go missing or is murdered in a community, can you just tell us a little bit about how that affects not just the family, but also just the community as a whole?
So I have to tell you that at the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes on the Flathead Reservation, we're a public law 280 reservation, so we're different than any other tribe in Montana. We don't have BIA or FBI. We have our own tribal law enforcement, which we've compacted through 638 self-governance. So in that regard, we have all tribal member law enforcement. So they're connected to the community. They are the community. And so they take it, we know each other, we're family. And so they take it very seriously. When we went through the process of developing our tribal community response plan, we had 11 different jurisdictions at the table. That was huge. The Flathead Reservation is 1.2 million acres, and we overlap 4 different counties. And so all the counties were represented, minus 1. And then we have cities, incorporated cities, so they were at the table as well. 2 big things came out of that, besides the communication and the agreement to share information. One was that our tribe dedicated more money to our tribal law enforcement to actually hire another officer who specializes in missing and murdered Indigenous cases. And then Lake County, which covers the majority of the reservation, they did the same thing. So that was huge. We had a lot of DOJ people there and FBI as well. So they were very thankful to be there and to learn of the actual crisis, that does go on. In the case of Jermaine Charlo, and I just want to touch on what Mary Catherine said, it's a jurisdictional nightmare. In the case of Jermaine, she went missing in Missoula, Montana, which is off the reservation. So Missoula County or Missoula City actually took the lead on that. But our tribal officers, worked hand in hand with Detective Guy Baker on that case. And then we had another case where one of our community members. She wasn't a tribal member from our reservation, but she was married into the tribe. She was actually a Mississippi Choctaw, but she lived here since she was 18. She went missing in North Dakota, returning from oil field country, and there was 2 different counties involved, and so they were supposed to take the lead on it and really weren't doing much. And so our tribal officers, had to push them and actually make them do their job. And unfortunately, that case was solved, and her remains were returned to us. But our tribe had to really push to, solve that case.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Chairman Sicki, I'll come over to you. Can you talk a little bit about when one of our women does go missing in a particular tribe, how does that affect the tribe, I guess, emotionally, like, losing a sister like that?
Obviously, every single life is valuable, and you simply cannot put a price on anyone's lives. But as you know, tribal communities and tribal nations around our country have historically been very close, and we're all about community. And here at Coshada, much like many other fellow tribal nations here in the U.S., the elders of our tribe we hold dear and with much respect and honor. Additionally, here at our tribe, the women have been historically at the forefront of survival and leadership, and so it's for any life to be lost is a huge impact. I cannot state enough the how profound of a loss it is. Especially in our tribe, we number less than 1,000. Currently, we are right around 966 members in our tribe, approximately 40% of which are 18 and under. So being a small tribe, in our case, when any life is lost, it leaves a tremendous, profound impact and a deep sense of profound loss. So, and I'm pretty certain that my other fellow panelists can speak to that as well at your own tribes.
Right. Levi, I believe we had a video from.
Yes,
Deb
we do. And we were sent a video from Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. And for us in Indian country, we're really, really proud of her being the first cabinet secretarial leader of a department in history of the United States, and it's taken this many years. And so we're very proud of the work she's done. When she was in Congress, she actually did some really good work dealing with some of the database issues that the DOJ has, and we talked about that earlier, and we'll probably talk about it again after the video. But let's play Deb Haaland's message to the audience tonight, please.
Everyone deserves to feel safe in their communities, but the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis is one that Native communities have faced since the dawn of colonization. For too long, this issue has been swept under the rug by our government with a lack of urgency, attention, and funding. The rates of missing persons cases in the American Indian and Alaska Native communities are disproportionate, alarming, and unacceptable. It's heartbreaking to know that our loved ones are at an increased risk of disappearing without warning, and that many times those cases go unsolved and unaddressed, leaving families and communities in the dark. But I believe we are at an inflection point. We have a president who has promised to prioritize this issue and ensure that Indian tribes have a true seat at the table. The time to act is now. In Congress, I led the Not Invisible Act and co-led Savannah's Act. Now, in partnership with the Justice Department and with extensive engagement with tribes and other stakeholders, the Interior is determined to marshal our resources to implement these laws to finally address the crisis of violence against Indigenous peoples. We're putting the full weight of our federal government in a cross-departmental missing and murdered unit. The unit will provide the resources and leadership to prioritize unsolved cases and coordinate resources to hold people accountable, keep our communities safe, and provide closure for families. We remain actively involved in the work of Operation Lady Justice and are encouraged by the interest and participation across the Biden-Harris administration. All of these efforts will be made more effective by our cooperation with Canada, Mexico, and other countries with respect to human trafficking, because this pervasive issue is part of the problem. The missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis has been centuries in the making and will take a focused effort and time to unravel the many threads that contribute to the alarming rates of these cases. I'm grateful for the communities and the organizers who rang the alarm and gave a voice to the missing. My heart goes out to the families whose loved ones have disappeared. President Biden's proclamation recognizing May 5th as Missing and Murdered American Indian and Alaska Native Awareness Day is a vital part of building awareness and combating the crisis. We'll keep working until our people stop going missing without a trace. Thank you.
And thank you, Secretary Holland. What a nice video, and how thrilling is it for us all who are Native to see a secretary who is Native American. It's very inspiring. And
I gotta say, that was the first time I saw that video.
I think I believe her is that she's going to really give the full weight of the federal government, and we'll see what happens. But we'll talk about that a little later on too. And Kyle, do you have more questions, or is it my turn?
No, back to you. I will say that was the first time I've seen that video. I know we at Native News Online have been working for the past few days to get a video from Deb Holland. And I guess in my head, I thought she might do it with like her iPhone or something, but it was actually quite a production. So that's cool to see.
Yeah, it was very nice, and as I say, it's very, very inspiring to have a Native person in that high position in the federal government. Chairman Sickey, I want to talk a little bit about you. Actually, your tribe helped fund the Say Her Name video. Is that correct?
Levi, that's correct. I'm very proud to report that the Cushatas have executively produced, the Louisiana Cushatas have executively produced both documentaries. There's 2 documentaries out. The first one being Somebody's Daughter, and the second one, Say Her Name. And we are going to premiere those 2 soon. The first one, for example, a documentary, Somebody's Daughter, the president actually, President Biden contributed to it, and he actually participates in the documentary. So again, I just want to thank President Biden for his leadership in this very important issue here. That's a huge, sad tragedy among Indian country here. So, and again, we are very proud of the fact that the Cushatas have been at the forefront of this issue. And I encourage other tribal nations and communities to join our efforts. We extend a hand of collaboration and friendship to others out there, and including our non-Native friends and families and neighbors as well. It's going to take a collective effort on all levels, among many communities, among all the citizens of this country, to put a tourniquet around this huge problem, and to address it going forward. It's going to take a collective effort, not just single-handedly, but all peoples of this country. And I'm also very pleased to report it's been a very exciting day here in Louisiana, thanks to the governor. We have been working very closely with Governor John Bel Edwards in the lead up to today. And I want to thank and commend him and applaud him for his efforts. Today, the governor issued the first ever proclamation establishing today as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Awareness Day. And I'm very proud of our tribe for leading this effort that led to this proclamation by Governor John Bel Edwards. In addition to that, this is hot off the press, Levi, and members of this panel and members of our audience. This is the governor, also John Bel Edwards. This was released just a short time ago. We have been working very hard to get to this to get to this document. Governor Edwards signs executive order creating the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Task Force here for the state of Louisiana. So again, this is encouraging news for all of us. It's an exciting day, and it takes leadership on all levels among many peoples, from the ground level all the way to the federal government agency levels. So it's a momentous day and a historic day for our state. And again, it's going to take aggressive efforts like that. I want to urge our tribal leaders around the country to meet with your local, regional, state, federal officials to do the same thing that we're doing down here. We saw a great void and a great need that needed to be filled, and the Native Americans took the first step. And it has taken many months to get these two documents signed by the governor. And he displayed some extraordinary leadership in doing so. And I definitely want to take this opportunity to thank not only the governor of this state, John Bel Edwards, but the First Lady as well, who has a huge interest, and she's a huge advocate for not only our missing and murdered Indigenous women, but she's a huge advocate for human trafficking matters as well. She's been at the forefront for quite some time and for a few years now. So that's what it's going to take. And I urge tribal leaders everywhere and tribal nations everywhere to take bold steps forward. And taking bold steps forward can result in these two documents like this. So these are tangible efforts being made down here in the South, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Thank you, Chairman. I will say that it is very, very nice when the governors are paying attention to this crisis that exists throughout the United States. And we know of several states that have set up a task force, and they have Chairwoman, what have they done in Montana? Is there a task force in place? Can you speak to that?
Sure. The state of Montana, under former Governor Steve Bullock, formed a missing Indigenous persons task force with representatives from all of the 8 tribes in Montana, and they've been going strong. This last legislature actually extended the work of that task force. So there's some feedback here. Yeah, so that happened. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Chairman Siki and the Coushatta Tribe of Louisiana for their efforts with somebody's daughter. When we previewed that film in Tucson, we had a working group for 2 days down in Tucson after the preview of the movie. And what we talked about what next. You know, because somebody's daughter was really designed to educate legislators to get all the legislation passed. So what we developed was a holistic empowerment and self-defense curriculum, and it's designed for Indigenous women to directly reduce the epidemic of rape, murder, and kidnapping and trafficking on reservations and in urban areas with large Indigenous populations. And to that end, we just graduated our first 8 facilitators, and there is going to be another cohort of facilitators. So if people are interested in applying to do this, there was 4 tribes, and we were one of them that did the pilot program. But if you go to the website houseofthemoon.org, you can apply to that. And you know, we had this great plan to convene a retreat in Yellowstone And then the pandemic hit, so we ended up doing it all virtually, but it was very successful. And just last week, we graduated our first cohort of 8 facilitators. Very powerful stuff.
That's wonderful. What age groups will they go down to? And these are prevention programs, I'm assuming?
They are. To be a facilitator, you have to be, I think, at least 23 years old. But the actual trainings, so the facilitators are trained in, the physical, spiritual, emotional, all that, with several, there's several topics, but each tribe can customize it to their own culture and traditions. So, for example, here we have Salish and Kootenai, so both, we had 2 facilitators, and they actually co-presented. That's how they were most comfortable. So you have to do 4 sessions to do the graduation thing. But yeah, it's a very powerful curriculum.
How the intent is to get to what age group, though, when you're talking to young students within high school, junior high? How is this going to be administered, this program?
So the way we did it was they just invited everyone. And, if you had probably middle schoolers or high schoolers on your, in the audience, they would probably adjust it accordingly, to age appropriate information. But it's based on empowerment and self-defense.
Yeah, so I'm happy to hear that. Mary Catherine, what's your feel? Are tribes doing enough to educate, maybe implement some prevention programs within their programming so that our young, and it's boys and girls, we know that, but I'm really happy to hear what the chairwoman just said. But what's your feel for that?
Well, I think the example that the chairwoman just gave is an incredible example. I think that it's one of the best examples I've heard so far. I think we have some tribes who are really at the forefront, and not to knock any other tribes down, but we have some tribes who just also maybe don't have the resources or are in an incredible crisis mode. As we know, a lot of our communities are facing various crises right now. And so I think that it really, what we should be looking to do is to take the role models we have from certain tribes that have been able to implement these kinds of programs and use that to help and sort of show other tribes in Indian country what options are out there. I think too of the Yurok tribe and what Judge Abby Abenanti has been doing there to really look at violent crimes that are being committed within our communities as opportunities for healing and sort of restoring those traditional cultural values that our people have, right? Instead of just, someone commits a crime of domestic violence, they're going to jail. Maybe they do ultimately go to jail, but what else can we do to restore traditional cultural understandings that really don't support this kind of violence in our own community? And that's not the whole solution, but it is a necessary solution because we've got to look at the violence in our communities holistically. And to your point, what kind of cultural trainings are we giving to children to sort of teach them that this is actually not the way. And so I think there are a lot of tribes out there that have some pretty incredible training programs. And I know I saw in the chat folks mentioning some different organizations that I've worked with and really want to uplift for just a second. And that would be the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, who offers a lot of training materials and resources, as well as the Urban Indian Health Institute and the Sovereign Bodies Institute. All 3 of those organizations, and also NCI, of course, I think have a lot of resources and materials. And I just think, every tribe we all have our culture and our traditional ways. And I think those are incredible resources when it comes to addressing the healing that we need and the ongoing violence in our communities. And of course, it doesn't prevent outsiders from coming into our communities and inflicting pain or harm. But I think it will go a long ways to helping our youth and helping our communities if we look to those things.
I think we lost Levi. I do not see him here. Interesting. Okay. Well, we will try. Oh, there he is.
I'm back. Modern technology leaves a little bit to be desired. No, I was going to say thank you, Chairwoman, and I think that to the audience out there, that's how Native News, we like to pride ourselves on engaging with our communities. And so Kyle's the managing editor. I'm sure we will end up doing a story on that, and that's the best resource or best sources for our stories come from just listening, talking to people, and feel free to write us at any time. And if you have good stories for us that need to be told. Back to you, Kyle.
Sure. I just wanted to bring up something that's occurring on the other side of the border in Canada, or that occurred a couple years ago. So the federal government in Canada had launched a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm blanking on the year, but they submitted their final report in 2019, I believe. And essentially what it found, it detailed the high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls throughout Canada, but it also declared the crisis genocide perpetrated against Indigenous women. And I just wanted to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Chairman Fayant. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the use of that language? Would you consider what's happening here in the United States to Indigenous women genocide?
Most definitely, and I think it was all part of the larger plan. But what from the beginning, what the United States government did to our people. This has been a really emotional day for me personally. We had a missing young woman. Her name was Miranda Rose Kenmill, and there was some remains found at a park, and it was just identified as her yesterday. So it's just been a really tough day, for us on this reservation. So I just wanted to give a shout out on prayers to her family. That it's just so ironic that this happened today. But I just want to offer up prayers for the family of Rose Kenmill.
I thank you for that, and what you just said demonstrates this is a real problem. It's not something that's imagined, something we don't even we talk about it because we have to talk about it, but it's very painful. And I know Native News Online, we've covered the MMIW situation issue for many years, and I'm happy that we're having this panel. But my condolences to your tribe and to the family and the community, because I know it's a painful time. So, Mary Catherine, we lost Kyle. I don't know what's going on with this production tonight, but we'll keep going. What are some of the barriers you've seen across Indian country for Indigenous people relating to MMIW? What are the real life situations? You can talk about entry level to law enforcement, how they're received, and just what do you have to say about that?
I would say just sheer lack of communication is what I've seen. And so sometimes we do have mothers of children who have gone missing, or relatives who, live in remote areas, maybe don't have great Wi-Fi access. So, maybe they don't use email. So there are a few challenges perhaps involved in communicating directly with the family, but it's certainly not impossible. It's 2021. People have phones. People have ways of being reached. And, the one of the biggest frustrations and barriers, I think, for the families that I've worked with is just not being able to talk to someone. And obviously, if an actual investigation is ongoing, no one expects the FBI to sit there and say, well, would the family like to look at the entire FBI file? Because someone in the family might be a suspect, and that's a real thing. But that's not what families are asking for. What they're asking for is just to have a conversation, like one conversation. And we haven't even really, in most cases, been given that. And I think that's really very challenging for the family. Often, so I think part of it is the family needing to get information of like, is an investigation ongoing? You know, they just want some assurances that someone cares and someone's going to look into this. But then also, we're talking about communities, especially on tribal lands and border towns and such, where, you know, a lot of times there's a good deal of evidence about who committed the murder, and everyone knows everyone. And so the family is hearing either they were a white eyewitness themselves or they've heard a lot from different people. They are a very valuable resource to law enforcement. Law enforcement should be interviewing them, should be talking to them. And when they're not, it hurts the investigation. And I think some instances, an investigation just isn't happening, and they don't want to actually tell the family that. So for instance, in Lindsay Whiteman's case, you know, the FBI didn't respond. The family didn't hear from the FBI at all, even though Lindsay was murdered on the Blackfeet Reservation. So there's no question of FBI jurisdiction, and they never communicated with the family. When they finally did, it was just to drop off her clothing to her brother. And so I think family members have a really hard time figuring out how to advocate. People have asked me to represent them as an attorney. I don't know what to do. What are we, you know, not every family can afford to file a federal lawsuit in federal court and try to sue the FBI for not doing their job. And so, you know, and that's not what I'm necessarily recommending, but like, what do you do when you have a family member who's been murdered and you can't get the FBI to just talk to you? And that's who has jurisdiction because of all the other issues we've discussed. I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And to be somewhat fair to the FBI, I think they've done a horrible job of communicating, but they also are understaffed and under-resourced, right? And so it's really on the Biden administration now to fund all federal agencies to full capacity to address this crisis. And I know, and I'm so glad to hear Secretary Haaland say that's what she's going to do. I believe her when I hear her. Unfortunately, she can't control the DOJ. Now, she can talk to them and say, here's what you should do. But President Biden can, and his administration should. And there's no reason to think they won't right now. But we have to stay vigilant in terms of, we can't just sit back and relax now and say, oh, it's all taken care of, right? We've got to keep advocating because right now it's just these investigations are not happening.
Chairman Sickey, you're pretty, can I go ahead and share first time publicly where you're going to be and who you're going to be with tomorrow?
Absolutely, Levi. It's your show. So
okay, thank you.
You have our permission and consent.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy to announce that Chairman Sickey will be, in fact, with the President of the United States tomorrow when the President Joe Biden visits St. Charles, Louisiana. And my understanding is your tribe is about 25 miles from where the president's going to be. And with that in mind, though, and could you tell us what I know you mentioned in your opening remarks, but what do you think the significance of the Biden administration is to Native Americans at this point, as it relates to the MMIW or persons issue?
First of all, before I go into that, Levi, I think one of the barriers, speaking of barriers, I think in the Native American world, trust is a big issue. And let me just state that since the founding of this country, justice for Native Americans has been inconsistent and disjointed. And because of that, again, as my panelist referenced, there's a severe lack of confidence and trust between Native American communities and citizens and law enforcement. And that seems to be prevalent and consistent from west to east coast and north and south. So I think law enforcement agencies at all levels need to demonstrate their commitment and their seriousness and their desire for parity and equality as they address violent crimes or missing and murdered Indigenous women matters in tribal jurisdictions. And I'm proud of the fact that again that this president is committed to tribal self-determination, tribal governance, and he is willing to allocate the resources for tribal governments to deploy into areas such as tribal police and tribal court systems, and I'm confident that that will occur. And he is going to visit Lake Charles, Louisiana, by the way. Just a small correction to Levi's city. And Lake Charles, Louisiana is located 45 minutes from west of the Coshada tribe headquarters. And so we, at the invitation of the White House Intergovernmental Affairs Office, I will have the opportunity to meet with the president tomorrow. And at that point, I would like to thank him for his support and his affirmation and of tribal self-governance and self-determination, and his long history of supporting Native American civil rights matters, and he has mentioned publicly that one of his proudest pieces of legislation in his entire career has been the Violence Against Women Act. And so I will take this opportunity to thank him for his leadership and support for Native American citizens, and also to let him know that this is a historic moment for Native Americans to work closely and collaboratively with the federal government in addressing the needs of our tribal communities around the country.
Right.
Thank you.
And I think I'm back right now, right? You guys can see.
You're back. You're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. We've done these live streams a few times. This is the first time I've ever had internet problems. But Chairman Fayant, I just wanted to ask you real quick, and a follow-up to Chairman Sicky's comments and his meeting with the president. What would you say to President Biden if you met him tomorrow?
I would ask him to put increased funding behind these kinds of initiatives. When Attorney General Barr came to the reservation, he said he had this big announcement. Well, it was that 11 MMIP coordinators were going to be established, and Montana was the first one. And so we worked hand in hand with Ernie Wayand in developing our tribal community response plan. And when they named the 11 states, I was shocked that North Dakota wasn't one of them. And there was, a lot of pipeline activity over there, which establishes man camps, which leads to sex trafficking, human trafficking. So, there's a flaw there, but I would say, please fund this at the level it needs to be.
And you had mentioned to us in our chat here, Shelly, that the DOJ has only established 11 MMIP coordinators throughout Montana. Is that right?
No, it's different states. Montana was one of the 11 states, but I found it really ironic that North Dakota wasn't one of the 11. And, there's a lot happening there. So
you bring up a great point. I have a friend who is he works for a law firm here in Grand Rapids, but he's a former assistant U.S. attorney. And we were talking about this matter about a year ago, and he said, Levi, he said, they're putting these coordinators in the wrong locations, and there's not much he could do about it. But I think it's something that we can report on, and as we see how the Biden administration moves forward, and for the audience, there is the Department of the Interior is doing a listening session and a round table this coming Friday, and we have it here on a slide somewhere, but we will, before we sign off, we will put that slide up so you can access it, and you have to go into the Department of the Interior's website and what is it? Visit the Operation Lady Justice website for registration information, and it's going to be 1:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So this is in 2 days, on May 7th, this Friday. So I think many of us are very interested in seeing how the Biden administration moves forward with this issue. We did have somebody from the Department of Justice who was going to be part of tonight's panel, but she was unable to, I got word, I think it was last Friday, she was unable to fulfill that commitment, but she's willing to come back the next time we do one of these. And so I know it's a real hot subject out there. And Mary Catherine, you've done some work with the transition team, as I recall, for Native American issues. What are you hearing? What do you think? What do you think is happening? Are you pleased with what you're seeing thus far from the administration? Can you share anything?
Well, yes, I was honored to participate on the teams of folks who helped prepare some of the campaign materials in terms of the Native Affairs policy platforms that now President Biden would take in the campaign, and specifically worked on addressing the issues related to violence against Native women. So far, I am pleased. I think, it is a little bit of wait and see. I've had conversations with some of the folks in the administration currently, and I can tell you that there are a lot of folks there who are really dedicated to addressing this issue, specifically some of the folks, I'm thinking like Libby Washburn on the Domestic Policy Council, very, very committed to addressing this issue. And I believe that she's going to do all that she can. I know Secretary Haaland personally, and I know she's going to do all that she can, right? So we've got some amazing, incredible Native women in this administration. I think one of the big things that's out there yet that I feel still a little unsure about is what is going to happen at DOJ. And it's not that I have any reason to believe that Attorney General Garland won't do the right thing when it comes to implementation of Savannah's Act or these issues, but he doesn't have a track record of having worked on them before. And at this point in U.S. history, we've never had an attorney general really champion this issue. And a lot of the conversations that we have as advocates in the field with U.S. attorneys and folks in DOJ, it comes down to prosecutorial discretion at the end of the day. And I think really to get this issue moving forward from the federal angle, we're going to need high level, someone like a political appointee somewhere at DOJ whose mission it is to address this crisis. I don't know if we're going to get that. And so I think, Secretary Haaland can, and all of our champions at DOI can push what they can push. The White House, DPC can push what they can push. But, I think the big question mark right now, and we've got some amazing Native folks at OTJ and OVW, but I do think some of these big giant policy calls about what to prioritize and whether investigating homicides of Native women is going to be more important than drug trafficking overall. These are big policy questions, and I think we need a Native person that really has experience in these issues somewhere in the sphere where those decisions get made. And so we'll see, but I do remain hopeful. And I think certainly what President Biden has shown us is that he has been so far very committed to putting Native people in places that there's not precedent for putting them there, right? And I think that's huge. And so there's a lot of people too. I know I've talked to some of the folks at DOI about kind of what is this MMU, the unit that Secretary Holland spoke about, what is it going to do? And I think they're really just getting started. They're hiring people for that unit right now. And so I think I know it's frustrating for a lot of the families who keep reaching out and not getting anything back, like any communication right now, but I know they're in transition. And so, just hopeful that they're gonna get on board soon and get to work.
Yeah, and the MMU, just to your point there, Mary Catherine, it sounds like great on paper, the missing and murdered unit. But what would you say is the biggest thing, I guess, missing from policy, or maybe it's legal, when it comes to MMIW? Would it be, like you said, someone in DOJ?
Well, the reason I keep going back to that is that, let's say Secretary Holland's team does an amazing job and they take on these cool cases and they create these incredible files that really go back, because here's the problem, right? We're talking about investigations where the feds at the time didn't do their job. You're coming back years later. It's really hard. These U.S. attorneys are political creatures, right? They are political appointees that got Senate confirmation. They don't want to take a bunch of cases they're going to lose, okay? So they're looking for cases where they look at the evidence and they say, I have a good chance of winning this because I may want to run for Senate someday or Attorney General in my state. They don't want to take a bunch of cases that might make the tribal community nearby feel really good about visibility and accountability for murders of Native women, but they're thinking about their political careers. And so that's the real disconnect right now. And so at the end of the day, we might have a really great case file from the cold cases team at BIA and at DOI, but if we don't have someone at DOJ who says, it's your job, U.S. attorneys, you go out and you prosecute these cases. We need that messaging. And we haven't had that historically at DOJ. Again, I'm going to just put it out. I'm hopeful that we're going to get it now. I think the quickest way to get it is to put someone up there in that upper echelon who is of that nature, right? And I think that's why, we have to support the team at DOI and BIA and what they're doing, but we have to also understand that the other huge piece of the puzzle is not just investigation, but is prosecution, and that's DOJ.
That's a great point. Levi?
I think we're going to play a trailer for Say Her Name, and again, thank you very much, Chairman Sickey, for your tribe's commitment to being the executive producer of this video. And we will, at some point, and I think we're going to try to work it in next week. I still have yet to talk to Kyle about this, but premiere it on Native News Online next Wednesday night. And it's a half an hour long, and it won't be quite as long as tonight, but this has been so informative. And one thing that we all know, that it's very difficult to talk about this issue in the confines of 90 minutes. And there's no way we can cover everything and even think we're going to cover everything. We're just really touching the surface, scratching the surface. But let's play the trailer, and then we'll talk afterward.
In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the national media in the U.S. was engrossed by a series of murders in Northern California, with San Francisco central to the killing spree. Dubbed the Zodiac Killer, law enforcement confirmed that the serial killer murdered 5 victims, though the killer claimed it was more in letters to the press. At the time, San Francisco alone had a population of approximately 716,000. I'm here in Hardin, Montana, the county seat of Bighorn County. Hardin has a population of approximately 3,500. Bighorn County has some 27 documented missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases, and approximately 20 missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys cases. Like the Zodiac Killer, most of the perpetrators of these crimes are yet to be apprehended and brought to justice. In Hardin, at least half of the MMIWG cases are unsolved. 86% of missing and murdered Indigenous people cases in Montana remain unsolved. But unlike the Zodiac Killer, the nation's media isn't focused here, though there are 240 plus more victims and likely many more due to underreporting. Bighorn County has the highest per capita rates of MMIWG cases in the U.S. I'm here to find out why this county, with fewer than 14,000 residents, and this small reservation border town Hardin, has been called the epicenter of the MMIWG tragedy.
Selena wasn't there.
We're getting stonewalled every which way we turn.
That's where they had found her body.
The racism in the Montana legislature is blatant, and it can get ugly.
Something could have happened on reservation and then they're transported off. The jurisdiction question remains confusing, even in those kinds of situations.
It's like they didn't even want to help me.
They don't do anything because we're Native American.
They couldn't give us an answer for anything.
They knew right away it was her, and they didn't tell us.
Case closed, natural causes.
I know she was placed here, and there's foul play.
As the trailer said, you can go to watch that video even if you want, have time tonight at www.somebodiesdaughter.com, www.somebodiesdaughter.com. It's a very powerful film, and we will be proud to feature it here on Native News Online next week. So with that, I want to thank the panelists tonight. You have been so insightful, and part of a journalist's journey in life is to learn something every single day, and I certainly learned a whole lot tonight from the three panelists. And Patricia, who was in from Alaska and had some technical problems with her audio, we apologize. And I don't know whose part it was on. I don't know if it was on our part, but I apologize. But I just want to recognize that we had somebody. Her name is Patricia Alexander. So we really want to thank her. I talked to her on the phone 2 days ago. She's a very dedicated worker, working very hard in Alaska to help solve the problem. And so again, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Sickey, Chairwoman Fayant, and Mary Catherine. It's always good to see you. So thank you.
Can I make one final comment, Levi?
Yes, sir.
I just want to make it clear that this is not a matter of political debate. It's not about political parties. This is a human rights crisis. And let me remind everyone on this panel and all of those viewers that are joining us here tonight that we're all brothers and sisters here. These are our brothers, our mothers, our family members, our loved ones. And lastly, these are our fellow Americans. And we need to do what we can to help each other by working together collaboratively and sharing the best practices that's working, and in order to make this country a better place for everyone. Thank you all so much.
Yes.
And I just want to echo real quick to Levi. Thank you so much to our panelists. And like Levi said, we are really just scratching the surface. It's a very complex and difficult issue to discuss in an hour and a half. So please, to all of our viewers, if you're curious about the issue more, please follow our amazing three panelists. They've been doing their work for a very, very long time. And Chimigwech to all three of you.
And I will tell this, because we had some comments, that if you want to watch this, you go to Native News Online's Facebook account and you'll be able to see it. It will be archived for a long time, and I believe it's going to be on our YouTube channel as well. So please feel free to watch this this live stream. It won't be live at that point, but please feel free to watch this production and spread the word about this very serious Indian country. And thank you very much.